All right, what's up, guys? I hope you're doing well. Um, One of the things, if you haven't noticed, from what I've been doing, is I'm pretty interested in the whole like green energy stuff. Kind of due to my like physics background and everything else, I've always been interested in like how all of that works. Um, and so like what, because obviously there's a lot of science behind it. So, but there's also a lot of regulations too, because it's a very kind of politicized thing. Um, and so I kind of just want to. I found a page basically going into some of the more recent like legislation and some of the things that could be happening, and it seems mostly up in the Northeast, um, kind of New Englandish area. So we'll just get right into it and talk about some of the stuff. So we'll go straight to the screen share, which is here. Yeah, boom. All right. So what's happening in states to advance clean energy homes, right? And this is from some Environment Maine, some website. um, so at a time when renewable energy sources are widely available and more affordable than ever, making sure our buildings can run on electricity created from the power of sun and wind is the next phase of America's clean energy journey, right? Um, One of the things that I think deems kind of noting, and this is kind of just in general with sourcing, but obviously with something called like Environment Maine, it's going to have some obvious bias towards green energy, um, which isn't to discount alternative arguments. It's just you got to realize what you're reading. So like more widely available and more affordable than ever, right? It doesn't mean it's more affordable than fossil fuels. That just means that, with respect to how it used to be for renewable energy sources, it's cheaper, according to this. Also, when you see things like, this thing here, which is heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters can be 2 to 3 times more efficient than the most efficient gas furnaces and boilers. Okay. There's no absolute data there. They're just saying 2 to 3 times, which 2 to 3 times what? Um, which is relevant data, right? But it's also like keep in mind you're reading some form of blog post or something along those lines. You're not reading a peer-reviewed article that's going to give you actual like data. It's just 2 to 3 times. Here's your bumper sticker to put on. But and that's one of those things. That's not to say there's something intrinsically wrong with that. It's just to say that be aware of what you're reading. Um, or what you're looking at. So, here, apparently in Maryland, there's a Climate Solutions Now Act with some bill with a number from the state Senate. But basically, what it's apparently going to do is one, set goals for 60% global warming emissions reductions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2045. Okay, goals are nice. So create a building emissions performance standard for buildings 25,000 square feet and larger to reduce emissions from state-owned buildings into net zero by 2035, and privately owned buildings to be net zero by 2040, and creates a pilot program for net zero schools. Okay, so a bunch of programs and other things, which I mean, I don't really have much. Not much comes to mind as of right now after reading that. It's kind of just more of a statement of what they have. I mean, if that's within the realm of reality, like they can do that, and you can build the infrastructure for it, then fine. Um, that's kind of my biggest thing for the whole energy space in general. Um, I don't typically see anything inherently wrong with moving to more green sources as long as you don't without the politics in it, right? And so my problem specifically with green energy comes from when people basically want to transition to it when it's not when it doesn't produce an equivalent amount of energy to fossil fuels as of right now. And that's not a comment on the efficiency of the energy itself. It's more of a comment on like if we don't I mean like if we don't have it there, it doesn't matter if we want to move it there or not. We have to have the infrastructure and everything else to put it there. And it's when you transition too quickly and you're like, we need to um, take a major hit in our energy production to move over to net zero. Um, well, there are trade-offs to that. You need energy for pretty much everything. Or not pretty much. I would almost go to say that's almost an absolute. You need energy for everything. To produce food, to produce whatever. And there's certain things that you like fossil fuels will never go away 100%. Just like how, in the, like centuries ago when wood was the major um, like energy producer with like fire and stuff like that. People still use wood. It's just we don't use it as often, but there's certain things that wood is much better for, like heating a home and a fireplace, right? Some people, now that could be more of a luxury thing to where it's not so much a more of just a preference. Like for me, I love wood fireplaces because I love the smell of wood. I love bonfires and that kind of stuff, and so that'll always be a source of energy for me. But I'm not using wood solely to power my house or like whatever. Um, so, anyways, so another thing that I just thought was funny was they're going to establish a building energy transition implementation task force. One of the things I noticed with pretty much anything politics is they love task forces. It doesn't matter what it is. So I just thought it was comical. But one thing that I think is worth noting that is probably a good thing with this is it wants to incentivize community solar for low and moderate income customers through tax incentives. Not necessarily the whole low and moderate income uh, part of the statement, but mostly the tax incentives, which I think is probably going to be one more beneficial and two have a lot less. Negative consequences when you do stuff when you kind of implement policy through tax incentives instead of just forcing people through regulation. um there's it's much less likely to, or at least at the surface, it seems much less likely to have adverse side effects when you're incentivizing people to do something rather than forcing them. Because if you incentivize them, they can still say no, because that makes the individual have to do that cost benefit analysis. Now that individual is either like a business or a person or some entity, whatever. Um, and so basically, you have, if they're incentivized, if that's their best option, they'll choose it. But if it's not the best option for whatever reason, then they won't do it. But just in general, it seems like tax incentives and stuff is probably a much better way to do it than just forcing people through regulation. Another one says that I was a little bit confused about, to be honest. But in Colorado, they're doing a similar bill, but it says, unfortunately, in its current form, the bill would allow some new construction powered by the combustion of gas. Um, so, kind of by the statement in general, and maybe partly due to my ignorance on what exactly like kind of they're going for. Um, to me, it seems like, so would not allow some new construction powered by the combustion of gas, right? So does that mean like whenever you're constructing the stuff, the equipment that they use has to be electric? Or is it like, the homes and stuff that they're building, or the buildings they're building themselves have no gas components? Um, whether that be probably like natural gas, I'd assume, if that was the case, to where they're talking about the buildings themselves, because I don't know of like, your house, like with stoves and stuff, it's either electric or natural gas for the most part, at least from what I know. So I'm not 100% sure on what they mean by that, because if it's like the actual like equipment that they use to build the house throughout like the construction progress and our process, I don't really see how they're going to get away from using some form of oil at all. I mean, a lot of the construction equipment that I know runs off of like diesel or some other stuff, depending on the equipment. But anyways, so there's also Massachusetts where they have the Better Buildings Act, which would require large residential and commercial buildings to report their energy consumption to the Department of Energy Resources. So just another reporting thing, more bureaucracy, whatever. They love that stuff. But the least energy efficient of these would be required to reduce their energy use or greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20% over 5 years. Okay. What defines least? Is it like the very bottom, or is it like the bottom 20%, or what is it? Again, we're talking about some magazine or blog post or whatever, so you shouldn't expect them to like give you exact numbers on the nuances of the bill. You probably have to actually read the bill itself to do that. Um, but still, just something to note and think about whenever you're reading this kind of stuff. So there's that, which fine, whatever. Don't really have further comment on that one. In Connecticut, the housing committee in the state legislature recently proposed to phase out fossil fuel in new residential construction in Connecticut, which I'm assuming is similar to the other one, or the comment I think is in Colorado or whatever that I was talking about, where it's like some new construction powered by the combustion of gas. So this makes me assume maybe it's the actual construction equipment they're talking about, or somewhere in the actual construction process, but I don't know. And then in New York, advocates are working to expand NYC's requirement that new construction doesn't use fossil fuels statewide, which I'm assuming is something similar. But it's also like, if to basically do this require, so like to not use fossil fuels um, for new construction, if that basically significantly increases the cost of construction due to that equipment being more expensive or harder to operate or whatever, or be less efficient, that means that at some point those prices are going to have to go to the consumer, those price increases. And so you're going to see much higher just building costs in general up there with this. So if that's still economically viable and it's kind of done through by um, free market means, all for it. Also, one thing to note, and that we'll see later, um, another article I plan on going about on some recent, I think it's this one. Yeah, another article that I plan on going over in a different video in a few minutes, or maybe later today. The author of that article actually talks to this one, Joanna Newman, or I guess Johanna Newman. um, so I don't know. That's pretty interesting. I didn't notice that the first time I went through this, that the authors of the two articles that I'm referring to actually had a debate over this stuff. And the article that I'm alluding to that I'll do a later video on is an opinion piece for the alternate point of view that you'll obviously see. But I think that's the whole point of doing this kind of stuff, is you need to have the different points of view, and you need to look at all sides and try to actually like kind of objectively understand something. And then you can kind of extrapolate that with your own beliefs or whatever. At least that's how I kind of think of stuff. So like I'm not a very opinionated person, and so I pretty much just try to understand as many different points of view as possible. And then once I kind of understand, once I can argue for a specific like concept or whatever from multiple different points of view, then I'll kind of start to form my own opinion on how it works and stuff like that. But I don't really have some emotional attachment to um, my opinions in a way. Um, it's kind of the point of making these videos and such, is just trying to learn and see the different points of view and talk about it and try to kind of look at it from as many sides as possible and discuss it and just try to understand it without trying to put too much of a Yes, too much of an opinion on it in a way. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. So I'll see you guys on the next one. See how that one